Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 23rd of March. Well, it was a nice power day. We could see that magenta was still riding above yellow, and we talked about the pivot that was potentially beginning as we looked at the day, but as long as it was still above the white, and in this particular case, so far above the 33 level. In this case, we're well above 43, and now we see that white's getting closer to it, but also starting to pivot lower. So that's the bullish case continuing to see. Now, if that breaks down below, obviously, it becomes a different story. But we had a short increase in there, and that was enough from the DOC reading here to really drive that short cover. And you can see that instead of steel dipping below, it pivoted back up. So short-term buyers got activated into that short-covered forced rally, and we can still have rising DOC red and of course shakeout positive. So all those things are congruent with the continuation, particularly being above the 50%. A strong move. From an NQ standpoint, almost identical, a little bit weaker just from the dip lower of the magenta, but still is in the critical phase, and Cyan had been riding ahead of this the whole time, but that shakeout moving to positive. But now that it's there, it's got to stay there. So any dip of that, and I would expect to see a pullback within that. And it would not be surprising. We didn't really have positive extremes, but this yellow bar right here would be a typical retracement move. Kind of a head fake, so to speak. The euro still flattened out at this particular stage. There's just a lot of uncertainty as to what's next. Will the Fed stop their rate increases, particularly as the commodity situation continues to remain a bit unhinged? Gold remaining flat at this particular level, but has completely reset, and almost too from the DOC reaching to the 0 point. So any pivot up there would be the beginning of a turnaround from that standpoint. And oil continuing to hold on to its previous gains. In fact, this time though we see white spiking up to it just one tick above. So we could begin to see the potential of some weakness. We'd have to see the magenta pivot below there, as well as pivot up of shorts from that particular situation to have that go negative of any kind of strength. And of course the positive extreme begins with this last uptick that we had just 2 days ago. And this is no surprise. We kept talking about this way back when it was way up here, because it was just out of line with what was happening in the real world as far as inflation. That meant rates would have to rise, and so the market is going to do that in this particular case as it dips from a TLT standpoint. Treasuries, that means the yield is rising, and nowhere else for it to go given what we're seeing from inflation and that. And that caught the bid from Bitcoin. We were looking at this one where it began that pivot there for slight weakness. And in fact, it started to dip lower, but then the magenta popped back up, and that was enough to start the rally. That was the second purchase there. And where did that go from? The original buy was right here at 41. And then it took a couple of different sell points, one at 42.3, and the secondary one was right there at 42.9. And that took a brief short because white's leading on that setup, and magenta pivot lower. So could see a little bit more pullback from that. ETH, nice clean run with that one. That it caught the breakdown below the 25 line there for the weakness, supported right on the 50%, and the turnaround took place just above that, and rode that through. Nice and clean action with it, a little bit of back and forth as it went. The 50K, it's just all green all the way through. And then look at the 5K, so boring. Really wasn't a whole lot to do. We got the buy signal. It was early in the morning. By the time the market opened up, it had already done the little pop, and it just continued. This was the last positive extreme setup right here at the 44.81. And when we started to fill back a little bit, it hadn't quite reached it yet. And still hasn't filled it. The other ones in between had been. So that would be the expectation for retrace on any significant weakness readings. All in all, pretty simple stuff. And this was what we talked about, the potential for this melt up, simply because you had so many people position the opposite directions, the max ping trade, so to speak, and befuddles a lot of people because they just don't understand. They're looking at all these dynamics, thinking the market has to go down, but as that inflation eats away, the market certainly is not going to take that on the chin until there's evidence that it's causing economic slowdown. And until that shows itself in the early stages, it's going to continue to push forward to accommodate that inflating of everything. So that's the long and the short of it for now. As always, though, we'll keep it updated and on target, and you will catch me on the Skype chat if there's anything relevant to report. Trade well. Talk to you later.